Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Sam Jacobs from 6 Degrees Investor Relations, and I'll be the host and moderator for today's presentation from Melbana Energy Executive Chairman Andrew Purcell, who will also be joined today by Exploration Manager Dr. Duncan Lockhart and Melbana's Chief Geoscientist Errol Johnston. Today's presentation follows on from last month's webinar and also the latest ASX announcement from Melbana, which was lodged this morning, regarding ongoing operations at the Alameda 2 appraisal well at Melbana's block operations at Block 9 PSC area onshore Cuba. So as usual, after the presentation, we'll commence a Q&A, and that'll comprise written submissions from attendees who've already submitted a question, and also live questions where, as usual, attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions directly. So those who've attended previous Melbana presentations this year may be familiar with the format, but again, if you'd like to join for the live Q&A component, just refer to your GoToWebinar control panel there, click on the hand icon, and that'll place you in the selection queue. So once you've been selected by the moderator, you will receive a prompt on your device telling you to unmute. Once you've selected unmute, you can proceed. As previously highlighted, Melbana management obviously like to take these opportunities to engage directly with the shareholder base and explain their operations. But obviously, we want to maintain that process in a cordial and timely manner. So just keep that in mind. And just once you've been selected and you've asked your question, you'll then be placed back on mute. Also, just monitor the Q&A section of the webinar. We don't want to have too many double ups in that section. So if you hear that your question's already been addressed, just another thing to keep in mind. A copy of the webinar presentation will be available on Melbana's website and social media platforms later today. You can download the most recent announcement which came out this morning just by navigating to the handouts pane in your control panel. So for now, as usual, I'll throw it over to Andrew and the team to kick things off. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here again. We've got a short presentation that really just sets the context for what is, I know, the most important part, which is the Q&A. But given the announcement we put out this morning, I wanted to just step us through what it is that we'll give you as a framework before we get into the Q&A. Very short. So we could pop through. There's an index. We're just going to set the context for what we have just completed with Alameda 2. I know that probably for those of us who are living it every day, we lose a bit of sight for how difficult it is to relay what is happening in the field and the order that it's happening in. So we've put together some diagrams and animations. So you can be at the same starting point for us when we get to the Q&A. And then the work that I have to share with you, I've got my clever colleagues on the phone and on the meeting to talk to those slides and answer your questions as well. And then we'll just finish with a summary of what we've done in Alameda 2, what we found, and what we'll do next, and then we'll go straight into the Q&A. So if we pop forward a couple of slides, please. What we've got on the left there is a video that is the oil flowing into the tanks from the Unit 1B test. As you can see, it's quite voluminous, good luster, lots of flow, so good light-looking oil. Unit 1B has been a great success, we think, from a number of measures that we'll talk to in this webinar. The first look at the oil we got from the bucket probably isolates it from the tank. Maybe it's a little bit clearer. I think the optics of the camera skills of our colleagues in the field, they're good engineers and geologists, and not so good on camera work, but you can see it's quite a light oil flowing into that bucket. That's not our sampling mechanism, that was the initial flow, where we get the separation going before we take the samples. So that's set the context. 1B has really delivered for us. Now, how we conducted these tests and why we drilled the well in the way we did feeds to a number of the questions we've received from many of you. And so the following slides, I'll ask my colleague Duncan to just say, look, here's the context. These were the upper sheet. This is the formation called Amistad. And it had a number of different units. We had to drill a vertical well. to test all of these units in the one well, near vertical well. And how we designed the well to do that as simply as possible, based on the learnings from last year's Alameda 1, is what Duncan will now talk to in the slides ahead. So Duncan, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. The slide that we have on the page currently is a schematic that shows the position of Alameda 2 with respect to Alameda 1, and the philosophy behind what we tried to do here and what we have done here was effectively, like Andrew said, drill vertically through the upper zones, and then we decided that we would deviate the well and head up dip to test the Amistad Zone 3 and a more up dip position. And in fact, we were successful in that. We did that, intersect that zone about 500 meters to the south of the initial well bore. So just running through the schematics of what we actually did then for the testing, we drilled down to around 450 meters and we set the 13 3/8 casing chute just above the entry point into Unit 1A. We then drilled ahead slightly around 50 meters.
Page 4.
Yep, and undertook the initial DST1, which this was the test where we flowed the 11-degree API oil to the surface. We couldn't measure the rate, but we do know that this was able to flow from this very shallow depth to the surface, and being 11-degree API oil is a great result, and we know that effectively it stopped flowing simply because the weight of the column killed itself. After doing this, we drilled the entire whole section then. We went through Unit 1A and 1B through what at this point we were calling Unit 2, but as Errol will explain coming up, we've revised our thinking about what we believe Unit 2 is. It now looks like it's a very highly faulted additional fault sliver of Unit 3 as we had defined in the previous well. We went through another seal and we got down into just above Unit 3 where we set the 7-inch casing after logging that entire section. Based on those logs, we were able to work out which zones that we wished to perforate through Units 2 and 1. We then continued drilling down to TD in the hole section. We logged that hole, and then from that we were able to work out where we wanted to put the slots in a 4.5-inch slotted liner, which we then ran, which is next slide. So we ran that 4.5-inch slotted liner with the slots open over the best zones that we saw in Unit 3, and then we undertook a DST of that interval. Now this is the interval where we had an initial inflow into the well of heavy oil, similar in composition to what we saw in Unit 1A, and we calculated that it ingressed into the hole at a rate of around 750 barrels of oil a day, but didn't make it to the surface due to the weight of the column. Well, after we ran this test, we ran a bridge plug to separate that zone off, and then we went back into what we called Unit 2 and perforated it. Then we ran a DST in this zone, which was DST 3, which unfortunately we failed to get any flow from. We then set a bridge plug over that section, and then perforated Unit 1B with a total of 70 meters of in total vertical depth sense of perforations over the entire interval, which represents only about 20% of the entire net to gross that we saw through that zone. But we chose what we thought were the two better zones within that Unit 1B. Once we perforated it, then we ran the final DST, and this is the one that we had a peak flow rate of around 1,900 barrels of oil a day, and the average of just over 1,200 barrels of oil a day of 19-degree API oil, and it's relatively lighter oil in comparison to what we've seen in the rest of the well, and it flows, as you can see, to surface unassisted. So we have now run a completion over that section.
That's an important point you made there. In Unit 1B, although the animation or the cartoon looks like we've perforated the whole thing, as Duncan said, it's really only 20% of the net pay of the Unit 1B that we've perforated to give us the results that we've reported. So, and then you've got the perforations themselves that are naturally restrictive on influx into the casing, which also is a limiter to the results we've had. So there's a lot of reasons to be very excited about this result. And I think if we page forward to the next slide, Duncan, the mechanism by which we're getting these flows are assisted.
Yeah, so this is a formation micro image of the section, and you can see, well, as a geologist I can see anyway, that there's a very highly fractured nature to this reservoir, and so this is obviously making a significant contribution to the flow that we've seen in 1B, as well as the natural porosity and permeability. So that has also given us a great confidence that instead of just using our conventional net pay cutoffs of 9%, that we can and will incorporate the natural fractures into these into the net pay calculation, which will give us a substantial increase in net pay throughout this section.
Thank you. Now, to understand what we've learned, and we're learning this almost slightly ahead of all of you when we report it, is what has all this told us, all of these results and all these appraisals, and that's going to be a work that'll go on for some time. But it's primarily the job of our Chief Geoscientist, Errol, who's put together this diagram at very short notice for this webinar to help us all understand a little bit what's going on in his head from the results that we've seen. So over to you, Errol.
Thank you, Andrew and Duncan. This represents a recent PSDM, which is depth migrated cross-section displayed here at 1-to-1 depth, with both wells plotted on it, intersecting a number of sheets which make up the Amistad project in the cover. And what we see here is the three coloured limestone units that we've actually gone through in Alameda were designated in the green, Unit 1A, which is actually a very thin unit as it turns out, but thin being 120 metres of net limestone pay, so I'd point that out. As we go through a big shale between the green unit and the underlying Unit 1B limestones, which are all designated in the light blue colour. And you can see there with the light blue coloration that Unit 1B represents many hundreds of metres of limestone. And really the perforations and the tests are only conducted over the upper sort of third of that unit. And so we've got a lot of that unit still below the well to actually be properly opened up and tested. It is useful to notice now that Unit 2 is now interpreted, in my opinion, as a faulted slice that belongs to Unit 1B, the basal part of Unit 1B. It's going to be a faulted slice of that. So what we saw in Alameda 1 was a faulted slice, an extra piece of 1B under the purple fault. The purple fault is the very important structural demarcation between generally the higher pressure stuff and the lower pressure cover units. But Unit 2 fits in the middle here. We now believe on the results of the well, which had seriously dipping stratigraphy towards the north, and all of those dip meters have been taken into account in this particular interpretation, that we've intersected where we thought there'd be a triangular wedge of Unit 2 making it into the well bore. It now looks highly likely like it's a faulted sliver of yet more Unit 3 coming into the well bore. And in this position, we actually only intersected really the rolling top seal part of that. So we're not in the reservoir proper above the purple fault for the Unit 3. As you go beneath the purple fault, though, we opened up the up-dip extent of the reservoir of Unit 3. And as you can see, that's separated. It's 200 metres up-dip from where it was in Alameda, where you see I've written Alameda Unit 3, which was probably around the 15-degree API, or maybe even a little higher. Certainly fairly high pressure underneath that fault. And now we've gone across those two faults 500 metres away to the south and 200 metres up dip across several fault slices, and we've encountered a fully oil-bearing zone with no sign of water that successfully tested and brought free oil into the drill pipe at a calculated rate of about 750 barrels per day. So on pump, this would do pretty well. And the thing that this really opens up is we've only ever assessed reserves and resource to the north of the purple fault for these zones. And as you can see from this depth cross-section, we actually expect more fault repeats of Unit 3 towards the south, potentially climbing up in the stack. And this would be very exciting for one of our proposed well locations off a new pad you see there in the orange line on the left-hand side of the section to investigate the giant roll that you see in the deep section of the end sheet, which is pushing its way and wedging its way right into the Alameda location where at the end sheet in the deepest stuff was encountered and very productive for oil. So obviously a vertical test through that large structure is sort of planned to be undertaken off one of the next projects. But one of the other things we can do is deviate the well through these upper sheets, intersect the Unit 1B again, intersect the upper part of Unit 3 and another fault repeat of Unit 3 before proceeding down on into the end sheet. So there's a number of things we could do here. But one of the things I really want to emphasise here is the thickness of Unit 1B, encountered with highly productive, heavily fractured limestone that flowed at almost 2,000 barrels a day through a vertical well through that section, with only the upper third probably tested. We are quite excited now that what would that do, given that we had to perforate casing to actually get the flow we did get, what would that do with a well-engineered slotted liner over the entire interval to actually produce into the drill pipe? So a number of those things all come to mind, difficult to sort of understand all the geometries I understand, but this is just to try to keep you in the tent here a little bit as we're thinking about what the structural complexity of this thing really is and how many wells will really need to be drilled now to actually understand the full extent of this thing, because this could be very big. And so one of the things we're talking about now is to step out fairly aggressively and to define the limits of this thing. So that's part of our ongoing program planning.
Well, and that's a good summary, Earl. Stepping out with more wells that can bring more production on and teach us more about the extent of this thing. But perhaps one thing that the listeners may find useful, Earl, is on this diagram at the very top in the green Unit 1A section, you have a heavier oil. Right down the bottom in the blue Unit 3 section, you have a heavier oil. But in the middle in the Unit 1B, we have a much lighter oil. What's a working hypothesis to explain that?
Oh, well, an idea we just talked about the other day, which has come about by this balanced cross-section attempt to trying to restore a one-to-one depth understanding of what's happening here across these faults. You see that Unit 3 is proposed to be climbing progressively across imbricates towards the south. Well, it's gotten quite high in the stack and now it's halfway to the surface by the time you get to the end of this seismic line. So if you go another 10 kilometres or even less than that, maybe even 5 kilometres to the south, it's potentially right near the surface and just under the clastics in the top fill. And if that's true, this Unit 3 may actually be related to the Pignon oil seep that actually is exposed to the south of us in Block 9. And it's from that seep, that surface seep, that in the early part of the 19th century, they actually recovered a lot of asphalt and paved the streets of New York from Cuban crude from that particular oil seep. And but actually, as Unit 3, it may be exposed to the surface. If further seismic was to be acquired back there and we could prove that, we could actually explain that that's how the bugs have gotten into Unit 3 and they've actually started progressively degrade some of the oil in the upper parts of those sheets. We'll just see if that holds up as a working philosophy going forward.
Thanks. Which isn't the case for 1B, which is more isolated and hence the bugs don't have the same opportunity, is what I take away from that. But thank you very much.
In contrast, are not exposed to the surface and would be under the cover and top seals between Unit 3 and the end sheet.
Thank you, Errol. We can page forward, please. So summary of the results to date, just stepping us back through what we've been announcing over the last few weeks and to put a counterpoint on Errol and Duncan's work just then. Unit 1A, we started with open hole test. We encountered heavy oil, but recovered at the surface, and it was unable to establish a flow rate, but it was movable and it recovered from such a shallow depth, which was, an exciting result. Then we went right to the bottom, Unit 3, a long way stepped out from where we intercepted Unit 3 from Alameda 1, but again, movable oil, heavier in nature, flowed indicatively at 750 barrels of oil per day, not able to recover the surface from the column of oil on top of it, but it's movable. And, with a bit of assistance, that's going to be a very nice little project too, typical to what they do in Cuba. Then we came back up. What we thought would be Unit 2, where we tested it, we didn't get any movable hydrocarbons, but as Errol just explained, it's now no longer thought to be Unit 2, where we were. And then now Unit 1B, today's results. Much lighter oil, much lower viscosity, a very small section of the unit that we perforated has led to a tremendous flow from a vertical well. So that's an outstanding result from a Cuban perspective, not just to get that sort of flow from a vertical well, but to get this sort of quality as well at these depths. It really does speak to the promise of what's ahead at the deeper depths in the next appraisal well. But in total, we got a 3 times increase in the log net pay in this upper Amistad formation. And that goes to like 5 or 6 times when we incorporate all these natural fractures. So we have this massive column that's got movable oils that flows to surface in the case of 1B unassisted and Unit 1A. And we've completed Unit 1B, as you can see in the diagram there now. It's hot off the email, hot off the press from Cuba just a few hours ago, overnight our time. They've completed the Unit 1B for production. So everything is now in place to turn this thing on when we're ready. Next page. And I will finish by just pointing to the Predrill Prognosis. So Errol's spent a bit of time talking about this Amistad Zone 2, Zone 3 reinterpretation from his earlier diagrams. I want to point out this is an old diagram, but the point of this is to show the next well is going to, we've got a solid black line, we've got a dashed black line. They are, the solid black line was the original Alameda 1. The dashed black line is the proposed Alameda 3 that's coming up next. It's exactly twinning what we did last time. And these 2 deeper structures, the Alameda and the Marti, they're the ones we're really looking forward to. I mean, we're absolutely thrilled with what Amistad's delivered. We've got a project, a very exciting project. But these guys down here, the promise of, look, this Alameda N sheet, as it used to be called, we've intercepted it way down dip where we've connected it. So we've got all this potential on the page to the left. It'll be a different orientation on the compass, but we've got all that up dip potential in green from where we've intercepted it. And Marti, both of these lower reservoirs, people have been watching our progress for a while will remember the sort of pressures we encountered in the formations when we were down there last time. And we got some pretty intriguing oil shows that we couldn't sample cleanly because it was part of the fluids formation. But what we, when it was really flowing over the shakers, it gave us very good reason to be optimistic that there is lighter oil down there, and we know if there's high pressures down there. Those 2 things together give us great promise of unassisted recovery to surface, but better recovery rates too than the Cuban average that's been applied to our resource estimates by our certifier. So if it's lighter, it moves easier, and it's worth more. So very exciting result, closed. Step 2, very exciting appraisal well coming up next. And I think that's all we had for presentation purposes. We could probably go back and leave one of those slides up on the screen, Alex, and get into the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew and team. So just switching over to the Q&A section now following the presentation. A quick reminder for our attendees, if you do want to ask the team a question directly, you can click on that hand icon just in your GoToWebinar panel there, and that will put you in the queue, and then we'll select you, unmute your microphone, and we'll go from there. But we'll just kick things off with a couple of questions that were submitted by attendees prior to the webinar in writing. First question for you, Errol. It's more of a question on the geology of the project, and perhaps just touching on it and reiterating what you went through in the presentation there. But the question was, do these results confirm and or change your initial geological model, and what's the implication for future drilling targets? Can you just sort of appraise that for us, Errol, with reference to what you went through in the presentation?
Yeah, well, I can. Well, in essence, we've still only had the legacy old 2D data. And with that legacy 2D data, we put together a geological and structural model, which is attempting to predict the very complex, multi-layered nature of this particular compressional structure. What we're drilling into is a multi-layered compressional duplex system composed of vertically stacked sheets of thrusts that are individually faulted up within each sheet to give a highly fractured and we now know very productive reservoir system. But that is difficult in its detail to actually speak to what exactly will we sort of find at every last wellbore, which is always concerned with details on the tens of meters rather than the hundreds of meters. But I would say that our wedging fall-in model of this particular duplex, composed of many different sheets vertically, has been shown to have been correct. We've drilled 2 very productive wells on this, both exploration wells stepping out in different directions, and they have come in with their top seals and reservoir systems within 100 meters. And frankly, that's hard to do on 3D seismic offshore. So I'm pretty proud of the effort that we've put in here and the results that we've achieved as a result of our structural model. I look forward to future exploration around this area to try to follow up these results in adjacent locations.
Thanks, Errol. Second written question that came in, this one for you, Andrew, slightly more broadly kind of project-based, but based on this announcement, when would you expect to be in a position, do you think, to have first oil for a trucking operation?
We've already sent out 1,000 barrels of oil on trucks up to the battery, and we've got Unit 1B completed now, so we can just hook that up and start producing from this Unit 1B when we're ready. You know, there's a lot of activity going on the well pad at the moment, but everything's in place now.
Great, thanks. Just one more from the written submission. We can see a few attendees have put their hand up to ask questions, so getting to you shortly. Just the third from the first round of written, the third and final for you, Duncan. Has Alameda 2 provided enough data to date to confirm or perhaps expand the estimate of assessed best resource by McDaniels and Associates that came out following the Alameda 1 result?
We do have a much more significant increase in the amount of net pay that we've actually intersected here compared to what was given credit to this section prior. We also now know, as I mentioned earlier, that we can incorporate the fractures into the net pay calculations. So with that respect, yeah, I think that we can expect an uptick, at least in the net pay. And I think the other thing that we can expect an uptick in is potentially the recovery factors as well. But McDaniels come to these numbers independently of what we have. I must stress that. And there is a fair bit of work to go before we'll be able to get these the data off to McDaniels. Errol still has to do a bit of remapping based on the intersected results that we've seen from the wells so that we can actually get the correct updated set of maps for the individual units. But, you know, overall, there might be a swing and a roundabout, but, you know, when you see the big increase in net pay and the fact that we've got, you know, over 1,000 barrels a day of oil flowing to the surface under its own steam, and from a vertical well, not even a horizontal well, I think we could expect something.
Thanks, Duncan. Okay, just switching it over to our live Q&A. Attendee Lawrence Gresh. Hi, Lawrence. We've just sent you an unmute prompt. So when you're ready to go, feel free to fire away.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks, Lawrence.
Fantastic. Look, tremendous news. And Errol, I know this is a very complicated structure, but that we've got here, or multiple structures brought together. Just with respect to Unit 3, and just going on the diagram, thanks for keeping that up on so we can view that. Is it interpreted that you've actually gone through two sections separated by the purple line there, the purple near horizontal line there? So two sections of Unit 3, and do they give you quite different pressure results, or and I can't remember if there were completions above and below that purple line?
Yes, they are two separate compartments separated by the purple fault, it would appear at the moment. And I must point out, this is very preliminary. I'm just trying to share with you my thoughts. The dips are rolling over very substantially through the well on the fault repeat that's above the purple fault, but it is full of oil. And we did try to test it. We had a number of issues with trying to pick where the net would be, and there it seems to be so heavily fractured. But the facies was a little, it was more like the upper part of where Unit 3 is, where I say Amistad Unit 3, under the purple fault. So we've had that piece pushed up and over itself. But this well has shown that there's oil both below the purple fault, up dip from Alameda's Unit 3, and there's oil above the purple fault in the next sliver up. So it's not a long bow to draw to say that each of these slivers is going to be oil bearing with no water involved. And what we need to do now is understand the actual stratigraphy within the Unit 3 sensor stricto. And that's going to be made a little easier by having this well at Amistad now, which has gone through that. Building an understanding of the facies changes within each of these sheets is coming next. And there will be some form of internal stratigraphy from the base of the unit through to the top seal of the Vega Alta shales that we keep defining the top reservoir of. So I hope that answers your question. We are rolling over. We are in a fall-in cutoff there where we've intersected it with this well, but the zone above the purple fault is full of oil as well.
Can I just add to that, Lawrence, that we don't actually have any pressure information that we've been able to achieve from this well as well. So we're not certain what the pressure differential is between what was previously referred to as Unit 2, which is the upper fault repeat of Unit 3, and below the purple fault at this stage. That was simply just due to the fact that the XPT tool that we ran, we couldn't get any valid formation pressure information out of it.
Thank you, guys. We'll just go on to the next attendee question now. So I'll throw it over to user Ben E. Attendee Ben E, we've just sent you your prompt if you're online.
Yeah, good morning, gents. First of all, congratulations. Second of all, it's a two-part question. Errol's mentioned the other well pads being set up for approval at the moment. Do you, one, foresee this as being an independent project from the lower intervals? Second part of that is, are you confident of starting to put holes in this structure before you get 3D done over the entire field? And then obviously the mention of the other Sherritt rig that just need a little bit of work on approvals. Is that something you're keeping in the back of your mind as a rig to be used for this?
I'll take that one, gents. We've got a number of pads that are short step outs from the Alameda pad, and we're permitting them up for multiple objectives on each pad, both shallow and deep, depending on, because we started the approval process before we had the appraisal results. So Errol's got enough seismic that he has given us the best sites to be able to drill more production wells close to these results with the seismic he has, and that's the immediate objective, to do those, to step out beyond this and, you know, in the years ahead, then yeah, 3D seismic. I'm sure Errol is rubbing his hands in glee, as would Duncan be, to say, can we get that done as soon as possible? But it's got to pay for itself. And, you know, let's get these production wells going and let's get the tin getting kicked to start balancing up the various objectives. The other wells, the other drill rigs, I beg your pardon. Yep, we've got a number of options up our sleeve for secondary and tertiary rigs when you count the service rigs that are available in the country that let us do various things as well. So I think there were 3 parts to your question and I've answered 2 maybe. Hopefully I got them all in that answer.
Yeah, so just probably a bit more on the rigs that you mentioned. So what sort of support do you see from the Cuban government? Do you see other companies being tasked onto this to support the project? Obviously, it's pretty critical to the infrastructure locally, all this production. So do you see directives going to other companies to maybe progress works with those rigs that maybe wasn't sort of originally going to be done, or?
No, there's plenty of rigs in country, some that aren't being used for lack of capital. We've got a project, we have the need. We're talking to a lot of those people and we have great support from the Cuban government, who's very excited as we are with the results from this project, and they're lending us great support. All the trucking, for example, is all provided by the National Oil Company of Cuba. So they're turning up and helping us and asking, you know, what more do we need? And it's a great cooperative environment to work in and develop this field as fast as possible.
Thanks, Andrew. Just moving through to our third user question now. For our attendees, yeah, keep in mind if you've got follow-up questions, you can keep your hands raised in your webinar control panel there, and we'll endeavour to come back around to you. But keeping it moving to the next attendee, Andrew Fawcett. Andrew, we've just sent you your unmute prompt. So just wait.
Hi there.
Yeah, hi.
Just want to say congratulations for the result. It's awesome to see flows finally. Just got a question, 2 questions about future plans with the project. When do you think 3D seismic will be shot over Block 9? And what's happening with the current easement for the pipeline? Are there plans to refurbish the site and sort of bring a big pipeline in to bring crude out faster in that sense?
3D is already in the planning stages, and where Duncan's talking to various companies, some who are already present in Cuba and some who are abroad, with the extent of what we want to do. That will take place as and when the field development plan gets approved by our board and our partners, which is being tabled over the next month or so. With regards to easements, and we're permitting up some options at the moment. We've identified some routes. The team on the ground is talking to the engineering consultancy we use for the pad approvals. There's a disused rail line near to us that goes all the way up to Matanzas, which is the deep water port, which is a very simple, low-hanging fruit corridor that's not built on, not being used by anybody, that we can run a pipeline up. But there are some other alternatives closer to the coast, directly to our north, for example, which has got a deep water oil terminal there. So a lot of my time is thinking about next year and the years ahead. Now, all of this is being done by the gentleman on the screen and some others who you don't see.
Yeah. Just on that, we've actually about to initiate a LiDAR survey as well, where we'll be actually flying a couple of alternative potential routes for pipeline as well.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, we can still see some attendees there with their hands up in the waiting room, so bear with us and we'll come to you. I just thought I'd go back to some of the questions that were submitted in writing prior. Next question for you, Duncan. One attendee asked, do you expect the lighter oil to be free-flowing in the Alameda and Marty sections? And will you have artificial lift available in case for Alameda 3?
Yeah, so let me, our expectation would be that with as the deeper we get, the hotter it gets, and the more pressure that you'll actually encounter within the reservoir systems. And we know that those reservoir systems down there are already fairly highly pressured based on what we've seen in Alameda 1. My expectation would be that a lighter oil under greater pressure should flow freely to surface. However, it's quite some distance, 3,000 meters to get it up to the surface. But yes, we will have potential for artificial lift mechanisms in case that it is needed. But my expectation would be at this point that we should potentially see free-flowing oil to the surface from those deeper sheets. But we don't know at this point. It's as simple as that.
Understood. Thanks, Duncan. Next written question for you, Andrew. One attendee wrote in, with the knowledge gained from the extreme pressure build-up as the previous drill bit headed into the Marty location, what's been done differently this time to safely accommodate the pressures that will be encountered there by Alameda 3?
The main learnings we took away were to simplify the casing design. We now know what we're going down to, so we don't have to have as many contingency stages designed in the drill string, which allows us to have something specifically weighted in casing strength and hole size for those pressures at those depths. We have a better BOP up on surface and manifolds rated to the pressures we know that we're going to encounter down there. And the main thing is we're going somewhere we've been before, and we've designed accordingly, generally.
You've got to remember, gentlemen, the full purpose of drilling this well, Alameda 3, is to properly evaluate the end sheet and I sheet reservoir properties, which we tried to do some things on the fly last time that weren't able to be completed like we would have wanted. So hence we're going back to re-drill that section where we know the oil, we know the stratigraphy, we know the pressures, we know where to set casing points. And all of this should ensure that we get some valid tests off in those zones. And that's the purpose of the well.
Look at Alameda 2.
And
on or ahead of schedule without any material interruptions to the drill program that we forecast. Same reason, we knew what we were going into, we designed accordingly, and we didn't have the surprises that we had last time.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, team. Okay, moving from the written back to our attendees now. Unmuting attendee Justin Schultz for a question. Justin, if you got that prompt, feel free to unmute yourself. Yep.
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, I got you. Yeah, just a quick question. Now that you've discovered that you can produce from Unit 1B, is the plan to start A3 immediately, or is that going to be postponed to allow some more production drilling in Unit 1B? And if so, what's the maximum amount of oil you can truck from the pad, given the current infrastructure in terms of civil works?
There's no interruption to the plan to drill A3 next. Wells take a while to permit up. The casing has to be bought months in advance. The drill program has to be agreed with regulators, the drill contractors. So A3 is happening next.
Okay.
Everything else that you're talking about happens after A3.
Okay, thanks. And in terms of trucking though from the site, what's the maximum capacity you reckon you've got in terms of barrels a day?
I think it's 5,000 barrels a day. We can see easily. QPET geared up for this. They have trucks running up and down the country, moving oil from one part of the country to the other all the time, and we're only, as the crow flies, maybe 30 or 40 kilometres from the battery and the deep water port. So we're easily there for the shuttle run. It's not the long-term solution. Obviously, we can get up to 5,000 barrels a day, lickety split, which I think we can. In parallel, we get these other infrastructure solutions permitted up and developed. It's not like building a pipeline from the Northwest Shelf or in the centre of Australia. We're on the coast.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, just moving on to our next attendee, Peter Devine. Sorry, I was just technical difficulties at my end. Yeah, Peter Devine. Thanks, Peter. We've just unmuted you.
Yep. Can you hear me there? Okay, congratulations to the entire team. Just wonderful stuff, and sometimes you wish you can just transfer that to the share price to put a rocket under its ass, but you're allowed to say ass? Yeah. But anyway, look, congratulations, everybody. So I think I've got two questions for probably Andrew, I think would be best. I'd noted that you said that you intended, it could have been answered before because I'm late in, you said you intended to return to A1. So possibly return to A1. So I'm interested into the rationale behind that. And also to early days, I know, but I'm sure being the astute businessman you are, you would have been looking at costs. So I wondered how much, you know, like, what's your ballpark figure of presenting a barrel to the market?
So Alameda 1 was and is, I should say, slated for plug and abandonment as the next work program off this pad. But there is some tension that I'm encouraging between our geology team and our engineering team, because this well goes, as you can see, straight through these upper sheet formations. It goes all the way down, but certainly in these upper sheet formations, these amistad zones, now we know something new about it. I've thrown the question out there, you know, is this another easy, quick potential producer to bring online at the same time? Are there other uses for it? If the geology team would like to re-enter it to do some other tests, and, you know, as we saw, the Unit 3 is separated by a purple fault. We could learn something different. Now we know that. We could learn back on that. So there's some value there to be discussed, but the tension hasn't quite played out. So I think there was an update meeting this morning I didn't attend.
Yeah, we had a good meeting this morning. So it's discussion, a robust discussion in progress, I think, is the greatest way to put this. So, yeah.
So that's that part of your question. The second part of the economics of the production. Look, we're in the appraisal testing stage, so we're doing everything gold-plated and more expensively. The best data I've got to answer your question is to look at another public company, our drilling contractor, in fact, Sherritt, who produced over 200 million barrels of oil in Cuba over the last 25 to 30 years. And they've done it almost entirely from these upper sheet formations. And they've reported over that time that their average cost of exploration and production was about $10 US a barrel. Now, their last reported number was, I think, 2018 or such, and inflation's done what it's done since then. So, I don't know, say $20 a barrel. Has it doubled? But it's still one of the lowest quartile cost producing environments in the world, Gulf of Mexico. And certainly being onshore Cuba appears to be no different to that.
Thanks, Andrew. Just one more question from our round of attendees. I know Lawrence still has his hand up, just in case Lawrence wants to ask a follow-up. We'll just check. Lawrence, are you there? Did you have a follow-up question?
I do. Thanks. Thanks for that introduced to the debate. With respect to Alameda 1, it's a high quality problem, so I really commend you to that task. But with Alameda number 3, would you still regard the Alameda formation and the Marti formations as your primary objective, or is there one over the other? And I did try to read up on Marti number 5, which was drilled a long time ago, and had live oil and relatively lighter oil as well. I'm just wondering how does that fit in the picture of the overall thing, because of the excellent result now of the 1B result, and of course Alameda 3 with these different compartments. There's so much to go for. So can you say one's the primary target and the other one's not? I'm not sure.
I think, Lawrence, the answer is more like, do you prefer your son or your daughter? But Errol, maybe you could have a crack at that.
Well, the Amistad sheet, the upper sheet, is well imaged on the existing 2D. So it makes good sense to actually design a near surface up 1,000 metre program to go around the place with the existing seismic we have and bang some relatively cheap shallow holes in it to confirm our models and establish some sort of lateral productive sort of understanding. So that becomes a target project in its own right, and preliminary maps that have been made on this upper sheet put the area of the thing at over 30 square kilometres, and what you can turn around and say is that's going to require in excess of 30 odd wells could be planned to look at. So there's a lot to do, but you can't drill all of those wells on existing seismic, so you've got to have the 3D, but we could get started. But the deeper section represents the larger part of this duplex, and the fact that 700 metres of oil-soaked limestone was unearthed in Marty 5 without them properly testing any of it and really realising any production from it points that this section's productive and full of oil even deeper than where we got to in Alameda 1. You've got to recall we sort of got into pressure issues with the base of Alameda 1 intersecting one of the many thrust faults separating it from Marty. It's at markedly higher pressure, but we're not even sure we believe that now because of some of the things they had, some of the drilling practices they had in force in Marty 5 might have meant that their mud weights were wrong. And so what we need to do is properly evaluate and learn about this deep section, because this may be the big mammoo that Cuba's been looking for, is actually what is down in the deep section. So we need to learn more about that. It's certainly the elephant in the room on every seismic section you pick up is what's going on in the deep section.
Thanks, Errol. Okay, that rounds out a list of attendee questions. Maybe just switching back to written for now. One written question that came in, Andrew, for you, and noting that we're really getting into the teeth and the details of the project now. But one attendee asked, in terms of possible development steps now from the Alameda 2 results, would these be concentrated on the best quality or highest flowing oil in the Amistad unit, or can a multi-unit level completions be developed within one well?
Not within one well, but off the one pad, certainly. You can have both shallow and deeper wells at different trajectories, so they're not interfering, hitting the upper and the lower. And that's part to my earlier answer. We've got multiple new pads being permitted up, circling this existing pad with good prospects in shallow and deep. So we've kept our options open. We've seen these results. We can start work on the upper sheet wells now that we'd want to put in for more production. And once we start to see some results from Alameda 3, Errol and Duncan will say, we like these ones the best, and we'll have a deeper well for next year as well.
We still don't know what the front runner project needs to be because we haven't tested the deep sheets at all. We've got a big uptick with what we found in the upper sheets, but the lower sheets, remember, they got us excited last time. So, we want to see everyone have its chance to put its hand up to be the main game.
If I could add also that the 4 new well pads that we've actually got out there permitting, it was as the strategy behind that was to maximize what we can do utilizing the existing 2D seismic as well. And the philosophy behind that was each pad having, like Andrew has already mentioned, a deep well and a shallower well. And effectively, we've been thinking around the ideas of the best way that we could, if you like, bracket a shallower level kind of development whilst we're still appraising the deeper sections. So we have been applying a lot of thought to this with the information that we have. And, the information has certainly been borne out by the well that we've just drilled. And we're really looking forward to this Amistad 3 to get onto what could potentially be a much more sizable prize than what we've already discovered in this particular Amistad zone.
Thanks, Duncan. Okay, yeah, well, we're still getting plenty of interest from our attendees, which is great. So I might just drop back to the floor and for some more live questions. This time, user, just a set of initials here, but user AP, we've sent you your prompt if you're online. We'll just wait for AP to see if they go live.
Yeah, can you hear me now, guys?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. So my interpretation is obviously that this result is fantastic from a drilling point of view. Just wondering how the market views Cuba's ability to process the amount of oil that you guys are going to have. My question is sort of two parts. Is there the ability for this oil to displace the Venezuelan imported oil that comes in? Or alternatively, if they don't have enough domestic refining capacity, is there the ability to go and fill up Dos Bocas or any of the other Mexican ones? Will they gladly take on this oil and process it as they would their own, i.e. is there near distance refining capacity?
Good questions. Ones that we're looking into ourselves quite a lot and talking with the Cubans and other refineries through our oil trading contacts at the moment. Cuba has a number of its own refineries operating below capacity because they need a certain quality of crude in order to be able to process and what they're designed for. What we're finding here in Amistad, this 19-degree stuff is suitable for refinery in the Cuban refineries that is otherwise dormant. So that's encouraging. The heavier stuff, yeah, that's the stuff that they tend to bring in from Venezuela because it's the heavier stuff that they're geared up for using to fire their electricity grid in country, and that can be displaced by the heavier stuff we're finding in this Unit 1A and Unit 3. So there's a number of different answers to your questions here, but for the regional refineries, the main game, a lot of the refineries around the Gulf of Mexico are geared up for heavy oil because that's typically what there was a lot of. But now that there's less of it available, Venezuela's historical ailments, US Gulf state refineries not having access as easily to Cuban and Venezuelan oil. An interesting price, supply, demand dynamic discussion to be had here, but it's too early to say more than that, but it's intriguing. I broke the webinar with that answer, did I?
You broke it, Andrew.
You didn't break anything. Apologies, Andrew. That was me, the host, leaving myself on mute, which was probably bound to happen at some point. So just keeping the attendee questions going now. Attendee Peter Surma, you've got your hand raised. I've just sent you your unmute prompt, so we'll wait for Peter. Yeah. Hi, Peter. Are you live now?
Yes. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thank you.
Yes. Just a quick question on, and congratulations as well to the whole team, on Amistad Zone 2, which in your today's interpretation was basically missed in Alameda 2. Would you be tempted to test it on the way to Marty or on the way back, since you're going right through it?
Sounds like an old geologist asking that question, doesn't it?
He must have been at that meeting we were having with the
I was
engineers.
just thinking that, yeah, I might just say very quickly that we are very much reassessing what we can do with Alameda 3, and we're having robust discussions about potential for testing, in particular, Unit 2 in the next well in Alameda 3. We're also, like Andrew has already mentioned, we're also looking at the potential for seeing what we can do in the original Alameda 1 well before it's P&A'd. So all of these things are now in discussion about ways of doing it. So to test these zones on the way down, we don't want to interfere with the current well design that we've got, because the first and foremost objective of Alameda 3 is to successfully and safely test the deeper zones in the N and I sheets, but we can be opportunistic. We've just got to get our heads together and work out the best way and the most efficient way that we could potentially test these zones on the way down. You know, we do have some time.
What I'm saying is that I'm all bent on getting production revenue in as fast as possible, and my mad scientists want to learn more things. So
absolutely, it's a friendly tension. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question. But yeah, nothing's off the table currently.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. Moving on to our next attendee, Simon Carpenter. Simon, we've just sent you an unmute prompt.
Thanks, mate. Congratulations. I must say it's great news, but it's a bit disappointing with the share price. I mean, we've had such great results, and I feel like we're only back up to what we were 3 weeks ago. It's a great lesson learned for me of how the market reacts, and we get great results. It falls off an absolute cliff. We get even better results, and we're barely back to what we were before. This is kind of my first time investing. I've been in the game of well construction for 26 years, and I never thought finding more reserves was a bad thing. But I've certainly learned a lot about humans and the market. That's for sure. But have you got any comments on just maybe the way that the previous notification came out, or any lessons learned? I mean, if we didn't have the previous announcement and we just went to this one, would the shares be, 12 cents a share instead of just back up to 8.8?
We are governed by listing rules, and we have to say things that we think are material when we know them on a continuous basis. So there's no holding bad news back or complicated news back, and this is a complicated story. And what it is a massive discovery, a massive prize, and there are things learned on the way through that are hard to interpret, let alone explain within the confines of listing rules, where we have to say certain things and we can't say certain things. So looking back over the past, would we have done things differently? Here and there at the margin, the communications could be better. This is why we do forums like this. This is a big demand on our time and of my people who are very busy, but we want to, in spirit as well as in the letter of the Lord, try and inform the market of what we're seeing and what we're doing. And, the old soundbite is the market's always right. So hard to believe at times, I agree, but all we can do is put information out there as honestly and as accurately as we believe we can.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll keep moving through our attendees. Starting to get a little bit tight for time over the hour mark, but I think what we'll do is move on to a couple more attendee questions and then run things out with a couple more questions from the written list submitted. So I'll just send the unmute prompt to our next attendee, Jasper T, if Jasper's there.
Yes, thanks. This question is for Andrew. I know you're keen to produce and get revenue. Do you think we need more money soon to develop A2? I know we got about 45 million US or 45 million in the bank as of 30th of June. Just want to see your thoughts on that.
No, we got enough money for this appraisal well program. We're adequately funded for beyond this appraisal well program. So I don't have to think about that. I've got plenty of other things to think about, but money's not one of them. Fortunately, thanks to the support of shareholders like yourself.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll just check in with our attendee, Andrew Forceps. Andrew's asked a question but left his hand up. Andrew, if you get that unmute. Yeah, hi, Andrew. Did you have a quick follow-up?
Yes, just regarding to the expectations with Alameda 3, I understand there's a lot of difference between results of Alameda 1 and Alameda 2 going to the upper sheet, going to the fractures. Do you expect a similar result in Alameda 3 compared to Alameda 1 regarding to the fractures in the lower sheet?
No, It's one for my colleagues. I don't think we were as successful in getting all the logs we needed like previously in those lower sheets, were we, Duncan?
No, we weren't. So we're expecting that, given that we'll have much better hole conditions, that we'll get much better logging results, much better higher quality logs, which is one of the biggest things that's helped us out here in Alameda 2, was the fact that the hole conditions were perfect, and therefore we got as good quality logs as that you could possibly get, and therefore we've been able to derive a lot of information from, in particular, the FMI log, which has helped us out with being able to pick out the fractured zones in particular, and also see the texture of the rocks and, the permeability and the porosity as well that we've been able to measure from the logs. So I would be expecting similar results when we drill down into these sections. The pressure will be on our drillers, obviously, to deliver another wonderfully drilled hole. But once we get to that point, then we'll have a much better idea of what we're actually dealing with.
Good one. Thanks, Duncan. And I'll just throw it over to our attendee, Ben E, who asked a question but kept their hand up in the queue. Ben E, we've sent you another prompt. Yeah, hi, Ben. Did you have another follow-up question for the team?
Yeah, I do. This is for Duncan. It's probably more related to what you saw on the flow testing. I'm just looking through the announcement. Apologies if I missed it, but have you got any surface pressures shut in and flowing? I noticed you did 3 shut-in or 2 shut-in events after the cleanup.
Yeah, yes.
Did you see the formation recharge well, or? Yes,
we did. I don't have the actual numbers here in front of me, but yes, the formation behaved in a exceptionally good manner. In addition to the lower section in particular in 1B, which we perforated, which is highly fractured, the upper section of 1B actually did have good primary porosity and permeability, and that was basically reflected by the way that the shut-in, the behaviour in the shut-in periods with the well. So I'm sorry, but I don't have those numbers conveniently at my fingertips, but suffice to say that yes, it behaved very well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. And perhaps the last question from the floor, I'll just go back to our attendee, Peter Devine, or Devine, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But Peter, if you had a quick follow-up for the team, just bringing you back live again now.
No, I don't have any quick follow-ups. No, everything's okay. Apart from the share price.
Yes.
I was going to go back. I mentioned that that we're getting on in terms of time, but just round things out with a couple of written questions. And perhaps for you, Andrew, just stepping back, because we've delved pretty deep into the technicals of the project. Some of the broader written questions. One was a little bit of a devil's advocate, but one attendee wrote, the recovery rates of the oil in place in Cuba do seem low compared to other reservoirs. Is there something the company can do to improve recovery rates, pumps, or other secondary recovery methods? So I thought, Andrew, I'd just throw that one to you. That was one of the written questions that came in.
I think perhaps the question might have meant by recovery rates, the flow rates, and maybe before this morning's results. But yes, there are a number of assisted lift technologies that are employed not just in Cuba, but in oil fields all over the world. The main one being in these upper sheets, because of the heavy fracturing that we've been talking about. They learned a long time ago to drill their wells at right angles to that dominant fracture formation. So it acts like natural little conduits for the oil to flow in, and horizontal wells flow typically in Cuba about 3 times the rate of vertical wells. So if we, look at this peak 2,000 barrel a day result from this well, from one small section, and then think about, well, could you put a horizontal well in that? Or and even if that didn't work, you just put pumps down it and rotting donkeys on the top. And this is old technology in oil field world, and all stuff the engineers can do.
But it's great because we're on shore and we can do anything we want to be able to orient a well from the surface to intersect anything we please. And we can employ all these artificial lift systems. This is not offshore. This is onshore.
Noted. Thanks, guys. Look, I'll just go back to attendee Tom Bleakley on the floor. I'll see if we can get Tom on this time. Tom, I've sent you another prompt. So we can see that you're live there, Tom. Just can't get any sound coming in. And I'm not quite sure why we're keeping Tom quiet here, which is a bit of a pity. But yeah, my apologies. We'll have to blame that one on some tech difficulties for Tom Bleakley. So maybe again, just rounding things out with a broader question, starting with Andrew. But in light of today's update, one of the attendees wrote in, do you still consider Block 9 to be of, using the catchphrase, of global significance?
Yeah, I've had a lot of questions on this term, and it's not meant to be a scientific comparison, but it's a 5 billion, it's almost 6 billion barrel oil in place resource from one well at the western end of a 2,500 kilometre license area in a demonstrably prolific hydrocarbon system onshore in one of the world's great hydrocarbon systems. So we've got hundreds of millions of barrels of resource already, and we've only just started. That's world class.
Yeah, look, thanks guys. I appreciate that, and I think this forum's given us an opportunity to delve into the details of the project pretty thoroughly today. And we just ticked over the 1 hour 15 mark, so we might conclude today's webinar there. But thank you to Andrew and to Duncan and Errol for the presentation and for again taking the time to answer questions. Thanks also to our attendees and everyone who submitted written questions prior to that live Q&A. Our apologies if we didn't get to your follow-up question or where we had some technical difficulties today. But as usual, I think the number of attendees on the call and the number who put their hand up for a question is again testament to that ongoing level of interest and engagement among the shareholder base. So as mentioned earlier, as usual, a recording of the webinar will be on Melbana's website, social media channels, distributed just later on today, so you can watch a replay. Perhaps just checking with Andrew and the team, are there any final comments that we might have skipped over that you guys wanted to add?
No, I think you've given us a good working over.
Nice one. Excellent work. Okay, well that wraps things up for today. Thanks again to everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. And thanks to my colleagues too.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much.